Welcome to Soul Obsession. This is my guide for how to crush the Elden Ring DLC even if you're not high level. First I'll show the build, then I'll show an overview of the run, including items to get along the way, and I'll show how to bully all 11 major bosses. I'm using the bloodfiend's arm, but in case it gets nerfed again, I'll also use a few alternate weapons. This video works on its own, but you can also use it after my previous two videos to quickly go from new character to DLC to overpowered without beating the whole main game. Every boss was fairly easy with this build, except the final boss, but even promised Consort Radahn can be staggered into submission without having to learn his whole moveset. Let's get started. On the screen, I'm showing the items we'll be using. Some of these are found in the DLC, and we'll pick those up along the way. For each boss, I'll use a slightly different setup, which I'll show before each fight. Here are my stats in the early DLC, and here are my stats right before the final boss. I leveled up only from beating the bosses, so you could get higher level than me if you clear the areas. You only need 11 dex for the Bloodfiend's arm, or 12 for the Great Stars, so I have a few wasted points because I started with the Samurai class. If you're starting from a new character, you can follow this video linked in the description, except I recommend starting with the hero class. Once you reach the DLC, you can follow this video to reach Scadutree Blessing level 10 without fighting anything, and I also show how to get these items. That's linked in the description too. So I reached the DLC around level 80 to grab our main weapon of the run, the Bloodfiend's arm. It's a guaranteed drop from one of the Bloodfiends in Prospect Town. You could just defeat all of them, but here's the exact one who drops it. Our secondary weapon is the Starfist, located outside the Leyendell Coliseum. It can be your primary weapon if the Bloodfiend's arm gets nerfed too much. Next we'll get the Black Whetblade, so head down the crater that appears after beating Radahn, and here's the path from the Ancestral Wood's Grace. We'll be using the Black Whetblade for blood and occult affinities. For bosses that don't bleed, we'll use the occult affinity. The two main Ashes of War we'll be using are Cragblade from a scarab here, and Endure, which you can purchase from War Master Bernal. A few other things we want are Golden Vow from the Knight on this hill, the Axe Talisman from Mistwood Ruins, and the Spiked Cracked Tear by the Minor Erdtree. And in the DLC, the Blade of Mercy Talisman from the Chest of Scorched Ruins, and the Two-Handed Sword Talisman from the Chest of Templetown Ruins. To upgrade our weapons, I'm going to get the Bell Bearings. The first two are easy, but the other two require beating 3 bosses. We could beat them with the Bloodhound Fang until we get the bearings, but I want to start using our new build, so let's respec. Here's how I allocated my stats. You should already have 2 larval tears from the Mimic boss on the way to the Black Whetblade. You can beat Morgott with a plus 12 weapon using the first 2 Bell Bearings. I actually got it to plus 18 before Morgott using smithing stones from the Fort of Reprimand, Ruined Forge Lava Intake, and Ruined Forge of Starfall Past. But that turned out to be overkill, and once Morgott is defeated, we unlock plus 18 anyway because here's Bell Bearing 3. On the way to the Fire Giant, we pick up 2 Sacred Tears and a few Golden Seeds, pop any runes or boss remembrances and level up. I can now level my flask to 11 charges at plus 10. The Fire Giant can be challenging, so here's my setup: the Bloodfiend's arm plus 18, a dagger with Golden Vow, Radahn's armor, Two-Handed Sword Talisman, Axe Talisman, Dragon Crest Shield Talisman, Great Jar's Arsenal, Boiled Crab. I've got the Spike Cracked Tear and the Stone Barb Cracked Tear, and here are my stats. Here's my buffing routine: eat some boiled crab, switch to the dagger and use Golden Vow, then switch back to the main weapon and use Cragblade, and two-hand it. And then I'm going to use the Physic last because I'm using the Stone Barb Cracked Tear, which only lasts for 30 seconds. But if you're using something else, then you could drink the Physic first. And I'll go for charged heavy attacks on the ankle. The Starfist also works really well. I'll be using it for a lot of the bosses later. I did use the Great Stars too, but not as much. It's a good weapon, but I'd consider it optional. For the second phase, I'll reapply Crag Blade and go for charged heavy attacks on the hand until we get a stagger. And then I'll hit the eye with charged heavy attacks, and you should get a ton of damage. There it is. And for the rest of the fight, I'll do pretty much the same thing. Get a stagger, and then go for the eye. Finally, I'll run to the Godskin duo who dropped the last bell bearing. I'm not summoning for the other bosses, but for this fight I'll summon Bernal. I'm using the same setup as the Fire Giant, but I actually should have used Endure to avoid getting interrupted, and the Stone Barb cracked tier is unnecessary, so I should have used the Opaline hard tier. For the rolling attack, you can use the pillars and even hit the Noble, if you space it right. Once you beat the first two, you can just wait around with Bernal and stunlock each clone as it appears. And there's the last bell bearing. Before we leave, we'll run ahead a bit to grab the Dragon Crest Shield Talisman +2. Now we can fully upgrade our weapons, but if you need an Ancient Dragon Smithing Stone, you can get one at the end of the Ruined Forge Lava Intake, and another one at the end of Ruined Forge of Starfall Past. Time to fight the DLC bosses. I'll start with Rellana. I've got a Bloodfiend's Arm +25, Dagger with Golden Vow, Radahn's armor except for the gloves, Two-Handed Sword Talisman, Axe Talisman, Dragon Crest Shield Talisman +2, Greatjar's Arsenal, Boiled Crab, and for the physic, I've got the Spiked Cracked Tier and the Stone Barb Cracked Tier. And here are my stats. I'll use Boiled Crab and drink the physic. You could use Golden Vow, but I didn't feel like I needed it. Rellana is one of the easiest bosses with this build. For the first 30 seconds, it only takes 2 charged heavies to stagger her until the Stone Barb physic wears off, then it takes 3. You can use Endure and then immediately do a charged heavy attack, unless she jumps away, but Endure prevents you from getting interrupted for the next 3.5 seconds, and it also increases your defense. This allows you to be more aggressive, you don't have to wait your turn to attack, and being aggressive helps get bleed procs and staggers, so it synergizes with the build. You can even use Endure to heal without getting interrupted. Her phase transition lasts long enough that you can usually stagger her out of it. Here I can see that she's about to start a combo, so I use Endure to make sure I don't get interrupted. And that allows us to get the stagger, because if I had dodged her combo instead, by the time we got a safe opening, her stagger meter might have regenerated. The Starfist is also good for this fight, and its charged heavies are fast enough to fit in 2 during the protection of 1 Endure. I'll use her Remembrance and level Arcane. I hardly did any side content, but I did kill the Black Jail Knight in Western Nameless Mausoleum. It's time for the Dancing Lion, so eat some boiled crab, cast Golden Vow from the dagger, and drink the physic last because we're using the Stone Barb cracked tier. And I'm using the same setup as for the last boss, Rellana, so you could refer to that. So use Endure to force openings, and you can roll with the grab attack to be in position to punish. And the lion will stagger after 2 charged heavies until the physic wears off. So be aggressive to get staggers and bleed procs. Near the end of the phase transition, you can go for a jumping attack, but don't be too early or you might get hit. For the lightning phase, it seems to work better to roll backwards away from the boss, and for the frost phase, I usually roll forwards. For some reason, Endure doesn't seem to work as well during the second phase of this boss, maybe because of all the multi-hits. This is the only time I really had trouble using it, so you might have to dodge more. And here's another phase transition, so we can get a jumping attack near the end of that. Might as well take out Black Knight Edred at the Fort of Reprimand. It's easy runes, and since I'm not clearing areas, I'm just running to the bosses. Every bit helps. Next we'll run to the Shadow Keep to take on the Golden Hippopotamus. We can almost completely stunlock the Golden Hippo with the Star Fist. I'm using a Cult Affinity because the Hippo is resistant to bleed. The Two-Handed Sword Talisman actually doesn't work with the Star Fist, so I should have used something else like maybe the Blade of Mercy. So eat some boiled crab, cast Golden Vow from the dagger, and don't forget to two-hand the Star Fist. And then I'll use the Physic last because I'm using the Stone Barbed Cracked tier, and I've also got the Spiked Cracked tier. So for the charge, you can run to the side and then chase the Hippo down, and you can stagger it with 2 charged heavy attacks. And then if you're quick, you can get 1 more charged heavy before the critical. Then we'll take the critical, and then after that, I'll go for a charged heavy, and then use Endure to avoid getting interrupted. And you can pretty much stagger lock the boss like this. Once the Physic wears off, I think it takes 3 charged heavy attacks, but they come out so quickly that the boss can hardly do anything. I did get a bleed proc here. It's possible that the blood affinity would be worth it, but I went with the Cult. Next, I'll collect enough Scadutree fragments to reach level 15. I'll show the ones I didn't already get in my previous video. I'll get the fragment in Templetown Ruins that drops from the Horned Warrior. If it doesn't drop, you probably already killed him. In the Cerulean Coast, I already got the one by the cross, but I didn't get the one in this cave. It's a tiny cave on the right side here. Then I'll go to the Fissure underground, and there's another Scadutree fragment by the cross. I'll also grab the Grace because we'll come back here for the Putrescent Knight. Then back to the Shadowkeep and progress up to the Storehouse 4th floor Grace for another fragment, and I'll also get the one right before Messmer, but I won't fight him yet. Then back to the Storehouse 1st floor Grace, but this time we'll progress down the elevator. Continue to the Ancient Ruins of Ra because there are 4 fragments here, so go down this elevator, and then you can kill this Hippo for another Scadutree fragment. Then back to Viaduct Minor Tower and into the ruins underground, and the pothead right before the Spirit Spring drops another one. Then continue to the cross, and of course that means another Scadutree fragment. From Ra Ancient Ruins West, go underground again, and this one is out in the open, you can't miss it. When you reach the inactive Spirit Spring, you can use Moog Shackle or Morgott Shackle to activate it, and then take it up, and here's the path to the Mottled Necklace +2, which we can use for a couple boss fights. Then we'll go to Muirth Ruins and go underground to progress, and here's the path to the O Mother gesture. We'll need that to help unlock the Mother of Fingers boss. Then continue across the bridges, and while we're here we might as well go to the cathedral and talk to Ymir, because we'll need his quest for that same boss. And then here's a tunnel that'll take us to the Church District. We'll progress through the Church District and drain the water, and then go down and get the Scadutree fragment on the statue. Then keep going down to the Grace right before the Scadutree Avatar, because here's America's rune. Then back to the Storehouse 1st floor Grace, and we'll backtrack to this ladder. Here's that path. We'll go down the ladder and continue till we get to a room with an illusory wall. So go through the wall and then to the coffin, and we'll ride the coffin down. We'll just follow the river, and at the bottom of this waterfall there's a Scadutree fragment, but we can't really get there from here, so I'll keep going and get the next Grace, and from here we can go around and drop down here, but don't drop down too far because we want to take this path, and now we can finally get the fragment. So here's that path from the Recluse River downstream Grace. So we can go around to the other side, and then here's where we can drop down. Don't drop down too far because we want to take this path. Keep going straight, and in a coffin is the fragment. Then back to the Recluse River downstream Grace, but this time we'll drop down the cliff, and then you can kill this Hippo and this one. They each drop a Scadutree fragment. Then drop down this cliff and grab the Darklight Catacombs Grace for later. Then back to the Shadowkeep and progress to the back gate for Commander Gaius. Before we fight Gaius, there's another fragment to the right of the Grace. Now we can use our Scadutree fragments and reach level 15. For Commander Gaius, I'm finally going to use the Great Stars, Occult Affinity, but you could use the Bloodfiend's Arm, and here are my stats. I didn't use Golden Vow because I'm saving FP for Endure, which we're using a lot, but I'll still use Boiled Crab and Drink the Physic last. I'm using the Stone Barbed Cracked Tear and Spiked Cracked Tear. And then you want to try to stay close to Gaius because we want to trigger the melee attacks, which are easier to punish, like this combo. And 2 charged heavies will stagger him until the Physic wears off. And I recommend healing and then mash light attack to get to critical. If you're quick, you can do both. And then we'll just keep up this strategy. Now here I was expecting him to stagger, but I think my Physic wore off. But no worries, a 3rd charged heavy will stagger him. And it's pretty generous as far as your positioning for the critical, you just have to be quick. And here's the phase change, so you can roll that, and then refill your flasks if you need to. And then while Gaius is in the air, use Endure and queue up a charged heavy. And like before, we want to stay close to Gaius so that hopefully Gaius won't run away as much. The Bloodfiend's Arm is better for this fight, but I just wanted to show that there are alternatives. And with the Bloodfiend's Arm, you don't have to use the Stone Barbed Cracked Tear for this boss, because Commander Gaius has less than 120 stance. That means that Gaius will stagger with 2 charged heavies regardless. I didn't like using the Star Fist for this boss, because Gaius moves around so much that I was missing a lot. Now we can get the 5 Scadutree fragments that Commander Gaius was guarding, and we can reach Blessing level 17. The Golden Braid Talisman is nearby, in the Shaman Village. You can use the O Mother gesture by the statue to unlock this door, and here's the location of the talisman. Then we'll travel back to the Darklight Catacombs and progress to the boss, Jori Elder Inquisitor. We need to get past this boss to reach the Abyssal Woods. The Golden Braid Talisman is good for this fight. You can chain backstab the boss, or you can do the usual Endure into charged heavies. Jori is pretty easy to stagger. And that brings us to the Abyssal Woods. There are 2 Scadutree fragments in this area. Here's one of them. And the other one is in the church ruins. I'll get the Grace at Mance Hall for the Frenzy boss we'll fight later, and we can reach Blessing level 18. It's time to fight Messmer the Impaler. I'll use the Occult Starfist. The 2-handed sword talisman is actually useless with the Starfist, so I should have used the Blade of Mercy or something else. For the Wondrous Physic, I've got the Stone Barbed Cracked Tear and the Opaline Hard Tear, and here are my stats. So I'll use Boiled Crab, but I'll wait on the Physic until after I enter the boss room to maximize how long it lasts. Then use Endure into 3 charged heavy attacks to get a stagger right off the bat. Then let some stamina regen before you take the critical. Then 2 more charged heavies as Messmer gets up. And then Endure and do another charged heavy as soon as possible. Then heal at the beginning of the second phase. And then for this move, we can Endure through it. And we can pretty much shut down Messmer. The Bloodfiend's Arm is also great for this fight, but use the Blood Affinity. You could even try Blood with the Star Fist and see if that's stronger, because Messmer is kind of weak to bleed. I'll level Arcane to 48. Then we'll return to the fissure and progress to the boss. The Putrescent Knight is immune to bleed, so I'm using an Occult Great Stars, but you can also use the Bloodfiend's Arm, which is even stronger. Otherwise, I'm using pretty much the same setup as the other bosses. I'm kind of rusty with the dodge timings for this boss, but it doesn't matter because we're seriously overpowered. I probably should have fought this boss earlier. Then I'll return to Mance Hall and progress to the boss. For Midra, Lord of Frenzied Flame, this time I'll try the blood affinity on the Starfist, and I'm using the Flame Drake Talisman, Mottled Necklace, Dragon Crest Shield Talisman, all +2, Axe Talisman, Boiled Crab, and for the Physic, I've got the Stone Barbed Cracked Tear and the Spiked Cracked Tear. By the way, sorry that I don't have the game audio for this boss fight. So now I'll use Boiled Crab, and then run behind the boss, and I'll use the Physic, and then 2 charged heavies for an immediate stagger. So then after the critical, Endure into 2 charged heavies for another stagger. If you do the right amount of damage, you can avoid the phase transition. It can be a good idea to pause before you take the critical to regain some stamina. Once the Physic wears off, I'll do a charged heavy, then Endure into 2 more charged heavies. And I got grabbed, but no big deal. We can just Endure into every pair of charged heavies. And this time I'll heal before the critical. And that's another boss that we can almost completely stunlock with this build. Then back to the ancient ruins of Ra and progress to the boss. For Romina Saint of the Bud, I'm using the bloodfiend's arm with blood affinity. Once you do a charged heavy attack, you can follow up with a jumping attack to get the stagger. Then as she recovers, another charged heavy attack into a jumping attack to lock her down. I didn't really use Endure during this fight, so maybe I should have picked Cragblade. Below half health, I'll get back for the phase transition. The Starfist is also very strong here, but a little more challenging to use because of its short range and how much Romina moves around. Romina loves to run away, that's why jumping attacks are so good in this fight. Then back to the Tree Worship Sanctum. For the Scadutree Avatar, I've got an Occult Starfist with Cragblade, the Golden Braid Talisman, and whatever else you want. Boiled Crab, and then for the Physic, I've got the Spiked Cracked Tear and the Opaline Hard Tear. And here are my stats. So I'll drink the Physic, use Cragblade, and eat some Boiled Crab. This boss moves around a lot, so it can be hard to land charged heavy attacks. That's why I also did some light attacks and jumping attacks. But this combo you can punish with a charged heavy at the end. And even a jumping heavy after that. The grab attack is tricky to dodge, but it's worth it for the punish. And then between phases, I like to rebuff with Cragblade and Boiled Crab. So while the fight plays out, I wanted to take a moment to talk about our stats. I'm going to stop leveling Arcane at 60 because I believe that's a soft cap for blood loss buildup with your weapon. Originally I was going to level Faith to 15 next, in conjunction with the Faith Knot Crystal tier, to use Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength. But I eventually decided it was better to put those points into Endurance and Mind. Plus, those buffs don't last the whole fight, and they cost a lot of FP, which I felt was better spent on Endure, particularly for the final boss, which was the biggest challenge of the run. but if you're higher level than me, then it might make sense for you to get some faith for those buffs. So heal up, and we're going to try to one-cycle the third phase. So stay close to be in position to punish. Ideally you want to dodge this attack, but you can also tank it. And then 3 charged heavies will put it down for good. Next we'll unlock the Mother of Fingers boss, so travel to the Finger Ruins of Rhea and sound the hanging bell. Then we'll go to the Finger Ruins of Dio and do the same thing. Then to the Cathedral of Manus Metyr, and we'll talk to Count Ymir. It's important to completely exhaust all the dialogue options. Then travel to the same Grace to reload the area, and if you did everything right, the chair should be empty, and you can open it to reveal a hidden ladder. For Metyr Mother of Fingers, I'm using the Blood Star Fist, and I've got the Spelldrake Talisman, and the rest of the usual setup. I'm using the Spiked Cracked Tier and the Opaline Hard Tier. It's the usual strategy, endure into charged heavies, and this boss is weak to bleed. It looks like if you're aggressive enough, you could kill this boss before the second phase. Next I'll head to the Dragon Pit, which will lead towards Jagged Peak. We'll get 2 Scadutree fragments and progress towards Bayle the Dread. We'll go to the Grand Altar of Dragon Communion, and then go up the body of the dragon, and this will lead into Karo's hidden grave. There's a Scadutree fragment in this area that drops from the hippo. Then travel back to the Dragon's Pit terminus, and this time we'll progress through Jagged Peak. And right here is another Scadutree fragment. It's by the 2 boulders that fall down as you approach. I'll grab the Grace for Bayle the Dread, but I'll fight him after the final boss because I'll need to respec. Now we'll return to Church of the Bud and burn the Sealing Tree. Progress through the final area, and at the Spiral Rise Grace, there's a Scadutree fragment. And from that Grace, we'll backtrack a bit, and here's the path to that difficult-to-find Scadutree fragment. Then back to the Grace and keep progressing through the area, and when you reach the Ice-Horned Warrior on the rooftops, turn around and in this room is a Scadutree fragment. And finally there's one by the Cleansing Chamber Anteroom Grace. And now we've achieved Scadutree Blessing level 20. This is it, time to face the final boss. I've got a Bloodfiend's arm with Endure and Blood affinity, Radahn's armor, Golden Braid Talisman, Dragon Crest Shield Talisman +2, or the Great Shield if you have it, Axe Talisman, Great Jar's Arsenal, Miquella's Great Rune, Boiled Crab, And for the physic, I've got the opaline hard tier and the stone barbed cracked tier. And here are my stats. So use boiled crab, drink the physic, and let's face Radahn. I like to stay near the fog gate, so we spawn here for the second phase. As soon as you see this attack, endure into a charged heavy, then endure into another charged heavy. Then do the same thing again. And this gives you a quick and easy phase 1. The second phase is challenging, but I still don't have to dodge very much with this build. Instead, I'll endure into charged heavies. I should have dodged that one though. And here I didn't endure soon enough. You still need to watch what the boss is doing so you endure at the right time, and watch your health because sometimes you might want to endure and heal. You still want to dodge the grab attack if you can, and if you can't, just use Miquella's Great Rune. And here I probably should have recognized the health threshold and hit him one more time before he jumped away. In fact, it's possible to stagger him and prevent him from flying away. Now here I should have just run towards the boss, I wasn't thinking, so I got caught by that. But no problem, Radahn's already dead, he just doesn't know it yet. Next I'll upgrade the Dragon Hunter's Great Katana, because it's an amazing weapon against Bayle the Dread, who I saved for last. First I need to respec. Then we'll get Godfrey's icon from this Evergaol in Altus Plateau. So let's fight Bayle the Dread. I've got the Dragon Hunter's Great Katana, the Dragon Crest Shield Talisman, Flame Drake Talisman, Godfrey's icon, Warrior Jar Shard. I didn't end up using Ancient Dragon's Blessing, but I used Boiled Crab. And for the physic, I've got the Opaline Hard tier and Strength Knot Crystal tier. And here are my stats. I'll drink the physic and use Boiled Crab. You want to fully charge the weapon art to take advantage of Godfrey's icon. This grab attack is technically not a safe punish window for the Ash of War, but I want to be aggressive to get a stagger. So yeah, this weapon is really strong against Bayle. I had a lot of fun with this run. Hopefully you found it interesting or useful. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.